we talk about pornography, it is often an extreme. Some people argue it's harmless entertainment, while others claim it rewires the brain and destroys relationships. The truth, most things in health is more complex. To answer the question of whether porn destroys your mind, we need to look at what science tells us about the brain, ecology of sexual stimulation, and the way habits shape long-term behavior. Pornography activates the same brain pathways as other pleasurable activities by releasing dopamine, chemical associated with motivation and reward. The brain, however, can adapt to repeated exposure. When someone consumes porn frequently, the brain can become desensitized, meaning it may take more extreme or novel content to achieve the same level of arousal. Doesn't mean the brain is broken, but it does highlight how habits can influence neural wiring and behavior. Beyond the brain's reward system, affect mental health and relationships. Research has linked excessive use to increased anxiety, unrealistic expectations of intimacy, sometimes decreased satisfaction with real-life partners. This isn't true for everyone, but for some, porn can create a disconnect between fantasy and reality. Instead of enhancing relationships, it can lead to avoidance, isolation, or a preference for online stimulation over genuine human connection. That said, it's important to separate myths from facts. Watching porn occasionally doesn't destroy the brain in a literal sense. But when consumption becomes compulsive, it can mimic patterns seen in addictive behaviors, making it harder to stop even when it causes distress. This is why some people describe feeling trapped or noticing changes in mood, motivation, and even sexual performance, such as difficulty achieving arousal without porn. Bigger question isn't whether porn is purely good or purely bad, it's how it's being used and whether it aligns with a person's goals, values, and mental health. For some, it may not have significant negative effects. For others, it can interfere with real-world intimacy, productivity, and emotional well-being. Recognizing the difference and being honest about personal impact is key. So, does porn destroy your mind? The answer is not absolute. It doesn't permanently damage the brain in every case. Influence thought patterns, relationships, and sexual function if left unchecked. The best approach is awareness, understanding how your habits affect you personally. Changes if those habits no longer serve your health and happiness. 5 keynotes of the speech. Pornography activates the brain's reward system. Frequent exposure can desensitize neural pathways, leading to higher thresholds for arousal. Excessive porn use is linked with mental health concerns like anxiety, decreased motivation, distorted views of real intimacy. Occasional consumption doesn't literally destroy the brain, but compulsive use can mimic addictive patterns that are difficult to break, create unrealistic expectations in relationships, sometimes lowering satisfaction with real-life partners. Awareness and balance are key. Understanding personal impact allows individuals to decide whether their habits are healthy or harmful. Pornography has a powerful effect on the brain because it taps into the same reward system that drives our motivation to eat, pleasure, and pursue goals. At the center of this system is dopamine, a neurotransmitter often described as the motivation chemical. When someone watches porn, brain releases dopamine in response to the novelty, excitement, and arousal created by the visual stimulus. Not inherently harmful, dopamine is part of how we experience pleasure in everyday life, but the challenge arises when the brain is exposed to high-intensity stimulation repeatedly. Real-life intimacy, which unfolds with natural variation and emotional connection. Porn offers an endless supply of novel and increasingly explicit scenarios. Each time a person clicks on a new video, their brain receives another surge of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior and encouraging them to seek more. Over time, cycle can lead to what researchers describe as desensitization. The brain becomes less responsive to the same level of stimulus, meaning it takes more extreme or novel content to trigger the same dopamine release. This doesn't mean the brain is permanently damaged, does indicate that its reward pathways have adapted to the overstimulation. It is similar to how someone might build tolerance to sugar, caffeine, even drugs. The same amount no longer produces the same effect, so more is needed to feel satisfied. In the case of porn, the escalation often manifests as longer viewing sessions, out more explicit categories, or difficulty becoming aroused without digital stimulation. This process can subtly reshape expectations of sexual arousal. The brain begins to associate sexual excitement with screen-based novelty rather than real-life intimacy. For some people, this makes real-world experiences less stimulating, leading to frustration or dissatisfaction with a partner. It may also affect sexual performance. Brain struggles to generate the same level of arousal without the constant novelty provided by pornography. one of the reasons why some individuals report experiencing porn-induced erectile dysfunction or diminished sexual interest in relationships. Important to highlight that this doesn't happen to everyone. Some people may watch porn occasionally without noticing significant changes in their brain's reward response. However, consume it frequently or compulsively, the risk of desensitization is much higher. Scientific studies using brain imaging have shown that heavy porn users often exhibit altered activity in the reward system similar to those seen in other behavioral addictions. Changes don't necessarily equate to permanent damage, reflect a brain that has been conditioned to expect high-intensity stimulation and struggles to find satisfaction in more natural, everyday forms of intimacy. What this means is that pornography, particularly when consumed excessively, can alter the brain's relationship with pleasure and motivation. By continuously flooding the reward system with dopamine, train the brain to seek more and more stimulation while simultaneously making other sources of satisfaction feel less rewarding. Neurological adaptation is at the core of why porn can become such a difficult habit to manage and why it has such a profound impact on some people's mental and sexual health. Excessive use of pornography has been increasingly linked with mental health concerns because of the way it can interfere with both emotional regulation and the perception of intimacy. Moderate consumption may not cause significant problems for everyone. Repeated and prolonged exposure has been associated with patterns of anxiety, decreased motivation, and a distorted view of relationships. One of the clearest connections is with anxiety. People who use porn heavily often describe feeling restless or uneasy when they try to cut back. Withdrawal symptoms seen in other compulsive behaviors. This cycle can lead to heightened stress levels, a sense of being out of control, and even guilt or shame about their consumption. The guilt is especially common in individuals whose personal values conflict with their behavior, a loop where the person uses porn to relieve stress, but then feels more anxious afterward. Another mental health concern is decreased motivation, tied to the way pornography affects the brain's reward system. The dopamine surges triggered by porn can become so powerful and frequent that they overshadow smaller rewards like studying, working, or pursuing hobbies. Over time, this can make real-world tasks feel less engaging, leading to procrastination and a lack of drive. Users describe feeling numb or unmotivated, preferring the instant gratification of online stimulation over the effort required to achieve long-term goals. The sense of reduced motivation isn't necessarily permanent, but it can create a harmful cycle where responsibilities are neglected in favor of the easy escape porn provides. Equally important is the impact on intimacy and the perception of relationships. Pornography often portrays unrealistic scenarios, exaggerated bodies, and simplified dynamics of attraction. For someone exposed to this content regularly, these portrayals can set distorted expectations of what real intimacy should look like. Partners in real life may not seem as exciting or perfect as the actors on screen, leading to dissatisfaction, frustration, or even avoidance of intimacy. This can put strain on relationships as one partner may feel neglected or unable to compete with digital fantasy. Over time, reliance on porn for sexual satisfaction can reduce emotional closeness, creating a sense of isolation rather than connection. Mental health is also affected by the compulsive nature that excessive porn use can develop. When someone feels they cannot control their consumption despite negative consequences, mirrors the patterns of behavioral addictions. This lack of control can fuel feelings of hopelessness, low self-esteem, and even depression. In some cases, individuals become trapped in a cycle where they use porn to cope with loneliness or sadness, only to feel more isolated and discouraged afterward. The mental toll grows heavier as the habit consumes more time and energy, leaving little space for real-world relationships and personal growth. All of these effects, anxiety, motivation, and distorted intimacy, highlight that while porn itself is not inherently destructive for every individual, excessive use can deeply influence mental well-being. By rewiring how the brain responds to pleasure and shaping how people view themselves and others, it can contribute to struggles that extend far beyond the screen. Occasional consumption of pornography does not literally destroy the brain, but when the behavior becomes compulsive, it can resemble patterns seen in other types of addictions, making it harder to control. Distinction is important because it highlights that the brain isn't permanently damaged from every exposure, but rather it adapts in ways that can reinforce a cycle of dependence. Use is marked by an increasing need for novelty, longer viewing times, and difficulty stopping even when the habit causes distress in other areas of life. The mechanism behind this lies in how the brain's reward system functions. Each time pornography is consumed, dopamine is released, reinforcing the act as pleasurable. Over time, repeated stimulation, the brain develops a tolerance, requiring more intense or frequent material to achieve the same sense of arousal or satisfaction. Tolerance building is a hallmark of addictive behavior, and it explains why some individuals find themselves escalating their consumption beyond what they initially intended. Compulsive element often emerges when a person begins to prioritize pornography over other aspects of life. Tasks like work, study, or even spending time with friends and family can start to feel less engaging compared to the immediate gratification of porn. This shift in focus creates a cycle where the brain craves quick stimulation rather than long-term effort-driven rewards. The result can be procrastination, loss of interest in hobbies, diminished drive to pursue meaningful goals. In many cases, individuals describe feeling stuck, unable to control the urge even when they recognize its negative impact. This lack of control is what aligns compulsive porn use with behavioral addictions such as gambling or excessive gaming. Beyond the behavioral changes, there is also an emotional dimension. Many people who struggle with compulsive consumption report feelings of guilt, shame, or frustration. These emotions can further fuel the cycle. Individual may turn back to pornography as a coping mechanism to temporarily escape negative feelings only to experience them more intensely afterward. Creates what is often referred to as the shame cycle, where the very behavior that causes distress becomes the chosen method of relief, perpetuating the problem. Over time, the cycle can take a toll on self-esteem and emotional stability, reinforcing the sense of being trapped. Another aspect of compulsive use is its impact on sexual functioning. The brain becomes accustomed to the high-intensity novelty of pornography. Some individuals may find it difficult to achieve arousal or orgasm with a real partner, sometimes called porn-induced erectile dysfunction, and it stems from the brain's reliance on the exaggerated stimulation provided by endless online variety. Effect is not permanent and often reversible with behavioral changes. It illustrates how compulsive habits can interfere with real life experiences and create barriers to intimacy. Occasional porn use may not be harmful for everyone, but when it shifts into compulsive behavior, it mirrors addictive patterns that are difficult to break. Combination of tolerance, loss of control, emotional consequences, and interference with daily life makes it clear that the issue is not about a single exposure, but about the long-term impact of repeated, uncontrolled consumption. Why distinguishing between casual and compulsive use is crucial in understanding how pornography affects the brain and overall well-being. Pornography often presents intimacy in ways that are exaggerated and far removed from reality, and this can lead to unrealistic expectations when consumed excessively. In these portrayals, physical appearances are often idealized, performances are edited for effect, and emotional connection is usually absent. For someone repeatedly exposed to such content, brain begins to internalize these depictions as a standard for what intimacy should look like. Over time, creates a gap between what is seen on screen and what is experienced in real relationships. Partners may not look, act, or respond like the actors in pornographic material, foster feelings of disappointment or dissatisfaction, not because of the partner's shortcomings, but because the expectation itself has been skewed by unrealistic portrayals. Disconnect can erode relationship satisfaction in subtle but meaningful ways. Who is accustomed to endless novelty online may find real intimacy less stimulating because it does not offer the same constant variety. Instead of focusing on emotional closeness, communication, and mutual pleasure, the brain is conditioned to crave newness and instant gratification. This can make long-term relationships feel routine or less exciting. They are healthy and fulfilling in other respects. Such conditioning may lead to diminished interest in a partner or avoidance of intimacy altogether, which over time can create distance, frustration, and even conflict within the relationship. Beyond the physical side, pornography also tends to simplify or distort the dynamics of consent, communication, and emotional connection. For example, it often portrays encounters where mutual respect and real emotional intimacy are missing. When consumed heavily, depictions can subtly influence how individuals perceive what is normal or desirable in relationships. This does not mean everyone who watches porn will adopt these beliefs. For some, especially younger viewers without much real-life experience, the content can shape expectations in ways that do not align with healthy relationship dynamics. Impact is not limited to the person consuming porn. It can also affect their partner. A partner may feel inadequate or insecure if they believe they are being compared to unrealistic standards set by porn. They may struggle with self-esteem if they are enough to satisfy their loved one. This emotional strain can damage trust and closeness, leading to feelings of rejection or resentment. In some cases, Partners report feeling replaced or objectified as though they are competing with a screen. This erosion of trust and intimacy can weaken the foundation of the relationship, even if the bond was previously strong. Another layer to consider is how heavy porn consumption can alter communication within a relationship. Individuals become embarrassed or secretive about their habits. It can lead to avoidance and dishonesty, further deepening the emotional divide. Relationships thrive on openness and vulnerability. But when pornography creates a wedge, couples may struggle to have honest conversations about needs, desires, or concerns. Without this dialogue, misunderstandings grow, and intimacy, both emotional and physical, suffers. In essence, while occasional use of pornography may not severely disrupt relationships, or compulsive use carries a significant risk of distorting expectations, reducing satisfaction, and undermining emotional closeness. How individuals perceive intimacy and how partners relate to one another. Porn has the potential to shift relationships away from mutual connection and toward unrealistic, performance-driven ideals that ultimately leave both partners less fulfilled. Awareness and balance are essential when it comes to understanding the impact of pornography, because not every individual is affected in the same way. Every experience with porn leads to harm. The key lies in recognizing how personal habits influence one's thoughts, emotions, relationships, and overall well-being. For some, occasional use might not disrupt daily life or intimacy, but for others, especially those who consume it frequently or rely on it as their primary source of sexual stimulation, the effects can become more noticeable and problematic. This is why self-awareness is such an important factor. Being honest about how porn affects motivation, satisfaction with real-life intimacy, and emotional health is the first step in determining whether it is serving or harming one's life. Comes into play when individuals consciously evaluate and regulate their consumption. Just as with food, technology, or entertainment, excess can tip into unhealthy territory. Balance may mean setting boundaries on how often porn is used, avoiding escalation into more extreme content, or choosing to abstain altogether if negative effects are observed. By actively monitoring usage, individuals retain control rather than allowing the habit to dictate their behavior. This sense of control not only reduces the risk of compulsive patterns, but also strengthens confidence and mental clarity. Another part of awareness is recognizing the difference between fantasy and reality. Porn is designed to entertain, often through exaggerated or unrealistic portrayals. These portrayals for accurate depictions of intimacy can lead to disappointment and distorted expectations. Awareness means remembering that healthy relationships involve communication, respect, emotional closeness, and imperfections that make real intimacy meaningful. People remain mindful of this distinction. They are less likely to let porn interfere with their expectations of partners or relationships. Also about knowing when to seek support. For some individuals, breaking free from compulsive use can be challenging, and professional guidance may be helpful. Counselors, therapists, or support groups can provide strategies to regain control and rebuild healthier patterns of behavior. There is no shame in seeking help. Demonstrates a commitment to well-being and growth. Being aware enough to notice the problem and balanced enough to take action is what empowers individuals to move forward. Finally, awareness and balance allow people to redirect energy into more fulfilling aspects of life. Instead of relying on the quick dopamine release from pornography, individuals can cultivate deeper satisfaction through real relationships, meaningful activities, physical health, and personal goals. This shift not only improves sexual health but also enhances overall happiness and resilience. By making conscious choices, can ensure that pornography, if present at all, remains a controlled and minor influence rather than a dominant force in their lives. In short, awareness of how pornography affects the mind and balance in managing consumption are the tools that allow individuals to safeguard their mental and emotional health. With these practices, conversation moves away from extreme claims about destruction and toward a more realistic understanding of how personal choices shape the outcome. In conclusion, the question of whether pornography destroys the mind is not answered by extremes, but by understanding how it interacts with the brain, emotions, and relationships. Occasional use may not cause lasting harm, yet excessive or compulsive consumption can reshape the brain's reward pathways, fuel anxiety, lower motivation, and distort expectations of intimacy. The truth lies in recognizing that pornography is not inherently destructive in every case, has the potential to become harmful when it replaces real-world connection or begins to control behavior. What matters most is awareness, being honest about its impact and balance, limits, or making changes when it no longer supports personal well-being. By approaching the issue with honesty and responsibility, individuals can protect both their mental health and their relationships, ensuring that choices about consumption remain conscious and aligned with their goals for a healthier and more fulfilling life.